Hello everyone, my name is Jason Stone and I am talking to you today about my dissertation proposal. This short video in lieu of an in-class presentation for EDLE 6910. The title of my proposed dissertation is Testing a Conceptual Framework for MOOC Motivations, an analysis of variance between 5 emerging MOOC participation styles and Pentrick et al.'s Motivated Strategies for Learning questionnaire. That is kind of a clunky mouthful, but it does accurately describe what I hope to do in my study. So why don't we dive right in? To start us off with, I have a list there of MOOC providers, just to sort of remind everyone that MOOCs are not, this really monolithic thing. There's a bunch of different providers doing a bunch of different stuff out there. All of it runs under the moniker of MOOCs. Little delineation very quickly between a couple of different types of MOOCs. We have here two different type of pedagogical styles. We have the sage on the stage who is presenting the material and the content, and that's going directly to the learner's computer screens. We also have the guide on the side, and that's a person who helps the learners interact with one another and facilitates participation. We have a couple of different types of MOOCs, and they're also, kind of based on that pedagogical difference. We have a CMOOC, which is a guide on the side, and those were first taught in 2008 at Athabasca University. The CMOOC is concerned with open sourcing of instructional materials and preventing the commodification of learning. The XMOOC takes its name from the edX platform, which was pioneered by Harvard and MIT, a joint collaborative venture between those two institutions. First, XMOOC was taught in Stanford University in 2011 by Sebastian Thrun, one of the co-founders of Google. Instructional paradigmatic metaphor is obviously the sage on the stage. These outfits are concerned with profit models, accreditation, copyright, and growth. I already talked about the title. The purpose of my study is to test an existing conceptual framework and to see if MOOC behavioral patterns determine if motivation predicts online learner behavior in MOOCs. In other words, if we look at a proper measure of motivation, can we see any difference between these 5 different types of interaction styles that have been proposed within the literature by some MOOC theorists? So my null hypothesis is that there's no difference between these groups' levels of motivation. My alternate hypothesis is that MOOC learners' level of motivation as measured on Pentrick's MSLQ will differ among the 5 different MOOC behavioral styles predicted by Hill. So let's talk about those behavioral styles really quickly. And you'll see here I have 3 different studies, 3 different conceptual frameworks that have been proposed by 3 different sets of researchers. And all of the ones that are in this row kind of go with each other, and really that's the way that my table's set up. So let's start over here with the first study over in the left, and it was conducted by Milligan and his team, and they are out of Caledonia Academy at the University of Glasgow and in Glasgow, Scotland. They were studying connectivist MOOCs, one of the first connectivist MOOCs taught in 2009 by George Siemens. And they were given permission to study the group and to interact with the group and to ask the group questions. They have come up with they've come up with a model of MOOC participation that involves 3 levels of participation. You have active folks; those are people who are generating knowledge, who are contributing to the construction of knowledge within the course. They are developing PowerPoints, they're connecting with other people, they're following all the other learners, as far as their Twitter feed goes. They have really invested a lot of themselves and a lot of their time into the course, and they're going to get a lot out of it. Then you have passive participants, and these are people who have not invested nearly as much. They are probably consuming some of the stuff that the active people are making, and they're participating in the discussion boards, but other than that, they're not really generating any learning objects for the rest of the group. And then you have lurkers, and lurkers are people who don't really actively engage in the content. They probably don't post to the discussion board. They may follow some folks on Twitter here and there, but they're not really engaging with the other people in the course very much. You have CMOOCs, and that's of course very different than an XMOOC. An XMOOC is much more like a course as opposed to a repository of knowledge. And CISLIC et al. In 2013 published an article and did a presentation in Europe presenting the results for a study of XMOOCs that they did on the Coursera platform. Now, one of the big limitations of this study is that it only looked at 3 classes on one platform. So it's not as robust a study as it could have potentially had been. However, it is interesting because it has a very different sort of methodology than the Milligan study. This study used click analytics and a number of minutes of video watched, and they developed an algorithm that used that number of minutes of video watched and analyzed a number of discussion board posts viewed or posted to, and they came up with these 4 categories of learners. And their click analytics essentially led them to believe that there's 4 different types of learning groups. You have completing participants, you have auditing participants, you have disengaging participants, which are people who are thinking about dropping out, and then you have sampling participants. These are people who pop in and really actively engage in one little module of the course, but only are really concerned about that one particular module. They could care less about the other 15 learning objectives, but they're really amped up about that one particular topic in the class. So you have also Phil Hill over here, and Phil Hill is an educational technologist and consultant to universities, and he has a blog called EDLE. And essentially what he did was kind of look at all of these different data points that were coming out of some of these preliminary studies, and he proposed these 5 different types of learners: active, passive, observers as opposed to lurkers, drop-ins, and no-shows or dropouts. So active people who are going to do everything in the class and pass. Passive people, maybe watching some videos, definitely participating on the discussion board. Observer participants, which there was a big kind of throwdown on Hill's blog, and they came to the conclusion that observer was a much more benign term than lurker. So sort of a little rhetorical, kind of softer language there with observers. Observers are people who are not really engaged in the class and are just, sort of every once in a while kind of looking at a few things. Your drop-in participants or your sampling participants, these are people who are, once again, really engaged about one particular topic and really focused about that. They fully engage in that topic but ignore the rest of the course. And then no-shows. No-shows are your overwhelming types of participants. If you hear that a MOOC has an enrollment of 180,000, chances are good 120,000 of those learners are no-show participants. And you can see why the middle model coming out of Stanford is flawed, because it doesn't include these no-shows. So you've got your drop-ins, your dropouts, you've got your active and passive, and then you've got your observers. So those are the 5 different groups that I hope to see manifest themselves in my study. My perspective. My positionality, I'm obviously a positivist. I love e-learning. I like math well enough to tackle this dissertation. According to Mertler and Venata, I need to do a one-way omnibus ANOVA. I will use Qualtrics to collect data and SPSS to analyze my data. Population, anybody who's taken a course on Coursera, Udacity, or edX platforms between 18 and 90 anywhere in the world. I hope to propose in February, collect data through March of 2014 and through October of 2014. Here to the right, you have a graphic that depicts a preliminary a priori power analysis. It indicates that I need a total sample size of around 305 to complete my study with a high level of power and certainty and generalizability. As far as recruiting goes, I'm going to post the URL to the course discussion boards of various different MOOCs right as they begin. And then I'm also going to distribute that URL on business cards at different distance education conferences happening during my data collection window. Talk really briefly about my instrument. I will use the MSLQ, which was originally developed by Pentrick, Smith, Garcia, and Mikichi in 1991. It was funded by a federal grant, and those researchers engaged in at least 4 different iterations of the survey before they got it to a high level of reliability and validity. The MSLQ is one of the most widely used motivation measures ever, and it's been used in over 150 different dissertations. A recent meta-analysis conducted by Creedy and Phillips indicated that it was a, quote, important psychometric measure and that it has a high degree of reliability and validity. So just when you didn't think that I could say MOOC or MSLQ one more time, we will talk a little bit about variables and procedures. Obviously, the MSLQ is the dependent variable, and their self-selection into one of those 5 different learning styles is the independent variable. You need to use an omnibus ANOVA because that allows you to compare continuous and categorical variables, and it allows for you to look for variance both between and within groups to determine the strength of a relationship. So this is an important dissertation topic because there's a lot of talk about neoliberalism dismantling the edifice of higher education, and before we go and tear down what we know, we need to make sure that we are replacing that with something that's going to be pedagogically viable and that's not going to disenfranchise entire sets of learners. If only the most motivated individuals can finish a MOOC, and it's only a good learning platform for people with high levels of intrinsic motivation, that may not necessarily be the best thing for all learners. And as educational researchers, we have an obligation to take up the call that was issued by Code and Siemens and Irvin in the JOLT, Journal of Online Learning and Teaching Special Edition this June, and they indicated that educational researchers really needed to get out and apply rigorous empirical methods to MOOCs so that we can begin to engage in data-driven decision-making when it comes to analyzing whether or not these are indeed valid educational platforms. So that is what I propose to do, and I thank you greatly for your time and attention. I'm available to answer any questions that you might have online. Take care of yourself. Have a great day.